Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started now. Hello, welcome. My name is Eric Berg. I'm the incoming president of the Jewish Federation of Santa Barbara. And welcome tonight. I want to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the Israel Committee of Santa Barbara, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Santa Barbara County. Just a note on logistics, we have built in a lot of time as part of tonight's panel presentation for questions from all of you. The way we are going to handle that, both remotely and in person, is that we have passed around cards, and we have cards available here in the room. So feel free to write down any questions that you have. We're going to get those to our moderator for him to take a look at and share with the panel. For those of you online tonight, I think our chat feature will allow you to enter any questions that you have. We'll have some monitoring those and have a way to get those to our moderator, and we will gather all those up, take a good cross-sampling, and have plenty of time for our panelists to address all of your concerns and questions. So thank you for that. And with that, it's my privilege to introduce our panelists and moderator for this evening. And first, let me begin with Rabbi Evan Goodman. Rabbi Goodman is the executive director of Santa Barbara Hillel, a position he's held since 2009. College campuses around the country have responded to anti-Semitism with varying degrees of success. But at the top of that success list is what Rabbi Evan has been able to achieve with Santa Barbara Hillel. Rabbi Evan has spearheaded the rejection of BDS platforms at UCSB every time they've surfaced. Santa Barbara is alone among all the UC campuses for their successes, and more broadly, largely alone among colleges all around the country with their success on this issue. It's so pronounced that Jewish families make the decision to send their children here based in part upon the positive Jewish campus culture that Rabbi Evan has helped instill here. So Rabbi Evan's efforts have not gone unnoticed. It's been recognized. In addition to recognized by all of you, he's been recognized by Hillel International, who's presented him with their Exemplar of Excellence Award. He's been recognized by APAC as well, who's presented him with their Ally of the Year Award. Rabbi Evan, thank you for being here. Thank you. Next, let me introduce Tally Wimbish. Tally grew up here in Santa Barbara, and she and her family have been hugely active with the congregation B'nai B'rith, her mother, Marcy, serving as its current president. Tally then went on to USC, where she received her undergraduate degree and currently works in talent management. She provides a wonderful perspective for us and for this panel, and as a recent college graduate who has her own personal experiences and perspective on anti-Semitism on campus. So Tally, thank you for joining us. And our third panelist this evening is Abe Fox. A little over 10 years ago, I had the opportunity and privilege to first introduce Abe at an event here in town, and I studied up hard and went through all of his background and reminded everybody of some of the touch points life, Holocaust survivor, a life's devotion to fighting anti-Semitism, 38 years as head of the Anti-Defamation League. And my introduction was fine as far as it went, but it really wasn't complete. And it wasn't complete because I really didn't touch upon what I think is one of Abe's greatest legacies, which is the thousands of people who have been inspired by him to take their own efforts in the fight against hate. Look at any politician, any lay leader, any political leader, religious leader in the world who's making a difference battling anti-Semitism. And I suspect I could draw a straight line between them and their relationship with Abe. He has had that kind of super multiplier effect on the Jewish community. So welcome back to Santa Barbara. And finally, let me say a few words about the gentleman behind me, our moderator, Steve Zipperstein. Steve is a distinguished senior fellow at the UCLA Center for Middle East Development. He's also a lecturer in the Global Studies program at UCLA and a visiting professor at Tel Aviv University's School of Law. Steve is the author of 2 books, and he's currently researching an additional 2 books. And if all of this was not enough, Steve also finds time to serve as an adjunct professor in the Department of History at UC Santa Barbara. Steve and his wife Diane are also extremely active in Congregation B'nai B'rith. Diane, like Marcy, having served as president of that temple. What I find remarkable and inspiring about Steve is that he accomplished all of this after retiring from a first career that was every bit as distinguished. Steve practiced law for more than 35 years, and working as a law firm litigator, federal prosecutor, Justice Department official, and finally as general counsel to 2 publicly traded companies. It's really an extraordinary dual set of accomplishments. So with that, please join me in welcoming Steve as our moderator and our entire panel for this evening. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak loud because we just got word on the Zoom audience that they can't hear too well, so we'll all have to speak up. Speaking of Zoom, we have about 200 or so that we're expecting, maybe more. So we have a big crowd, big crowd. You know, I just want to pay tribute to Eric Berg, who introduced all of us. You know, talk about masochists. Eric just finished the term as president of the Lawyers Association here in Santa Barbara, the County Bar Association. He's going from that frying pan into this fire to become president of the Federation. Eric is a wonderful, wonderful person. And speaking of wonderful people, Dan Meisel, who's in the back there, would you please stand up, Dan? For those of you who don't know, he's the regional ADL director here in Santa Barbara, the Tri-County area. Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo. Dan yesterday gave what I thought was an incredible presentation. Incredible. Many of you were there at the synagogue on anti-Semitism. Thoughtful, scholarly, precise, thought-provoking, and I believe it was recorded, Rabbi, and it's available on the CBB Facebook page in the video section, or on the CBB page. One or the other, you'll find it. And I really think that if you listen to what Dan said yesterday, and then with what our panelists are going to say tonight, we will be well equipped to deal with what? To deal with the very, very nerve-wracking situation that we find ourselves in right now. And
Everybody's saying we can't hear, we can't hear.
we can't hear. On Zoom?
We're going to mute them.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Anti-Semitism is a virus. It's a disease. It never goes away. There's no inoculation for it. There's no vaccination. It rears itself. It shape shifts. It mutates. We're used to mutations with COVID. That's what we see with anti-Semitism. And we're all concerned that it seems to be on the upswing, both from the left and the right, here and especially overseas, in France, in England. Walk down Bobrashov Street in Tel Aviv and you will see one French business after another. And if you walk in and ask them, are you here because of Zionism or are you here because of anti-Semitism? You know what the answer is going to be. In addition, we're all concerned as well about the rise of an unprecedentedly right-wing government in Israel. I don't want to get political, but Mr. Foxman just wrote about this and was interviewed about this in the Israeli press in the last 2 or 3 days. So maybe we'll hear a bit about that. So we sort of feel like the walls are closing in on us a little bit, which is why all of us are here tonight. I want to say one more word about Abe Foxman. Then I'm going to invite each of our 3 panelists to make a brief opening statement. And as you heard, we're going to take questions in writing, as many as possible. I'll go through them as well on Zoom. Please chat your questions. We'll go through those as well. I will ask probably 3 or 4 questions at a time. I want as many of you to be able to have your questions asked as possible, and our panelists will answer them either individually or as many as they can get to. And we'll try to go through a few rounds of these questions before we're done. I met Abe Foxman in New York City for the first time about a dozen years ago, and I was immediately impressed by what I thought was an incredibly brilliant strategic mind. A brilliant strategic mind. I was upset about something that Obama had said about Israel, and Abe said, calm down, think before you act, and analyze it from every possible angle, which is what he has done his entire adult life, fighting anti-Semitism, his entire life, not just his adult life. Abe Foxman, to me, is one of the 2 or 3 greatest Jewish leaders in the world outside Israel, maybe top 10 if you include Israel, in the last century. It is a singular honor for us to have him here tonight, really, and especially in this time. So with that, I'm going to ask each panelist to begin with a very brief, and I'm going to enforce the time limits. Tali, who recently graduated from USC and had some experiences on campus that were quite disturbing and quite frightening. Tali, if you would talk for 2 or 3 minutes about your experiences, and then we'll move to Rabbi Evan, and finally to Abe.
Yeah. So my name is Tali Wimbish. I graduated from USC in May of 2021, which was also happened to be a month with an uprising conflict in Israel around that time, in which I experienced an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism from close friends, roommates, people I didn't know, which was, obviously upsetting, but at the end of the day, really pushed me to educate myself and inform myself and connect to my Jewish identity more than I ever had before in my life. I really began this journey of gaining so much pride in my Jewish identity and hoping to inform others and encourage others to really get to know their Jewish identity and connect with their heritage. And why I may not be as, distinguished or knowledgeable as these 2 awesome panelists, hopefully I can offer an interesting perspective as somebody who was recently involved in campus anti-Semitism and who works in digital media and knows social media really well, is really plugged into what's happening online, and has been affected by anti-Semitism online. So yeah, hopefully I can answer some questions that people have about that and reflect based on my experience and what little knowledge I have. And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tali. Be thinking of your questions and be writing them down, okay, as you hear our speakers. We're going to move to Rabbi Evan Goodman, 14 years at Hillel, 14 years of no BDS at UC Santa Barbara, an unbelievable record. Rabbi.
Thank you, Steve. Don't jinx it, please. In the few minutes that we have to begin, I'd like to distill my message into 4 key thoughts, 2 that begin with the letter A, 2 that begin with the letter S. Anti-Semitism from the right and the left, anti-Zionism, systematic exclusion, and social media. So number 1, anti-Semitism is coming at us from the right and the left. And often people ask me, what do you see on campus, or what's the worst of the 2? They're both bad. They're both clearly bad. But on the college campus, at least at our campus and at many other progressive, liberal-leaning university student bodies, it's clearly coming from the left. So that's the world that I inhabit. And the anti-Semitism of the left is mostly what we experience on the college campus. Again, I'm happy to go into more depth during question times. Anti-Zionism. Is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism, people ask. I say anti-Zionism today is anti-Semitism. It's the most common manifestation on campus of anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism denies Jews, I will put that even closer. Anti-Zionism denies Jews the most basic right that is afforded to any people, that of safety and self-determination. Way back in March 2016, almost 7 years ago, I wrote an op-ed that was published in LA newspapers. Anti-Zionism is the face of contemporary anti-Semitism. And that was considered unusual to posit that at that time, but I don't think it's so unusual anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean that any discussion of Israeli policies or Israeli government is inherently anti-Semitic. It means having Israel stand in as the collective personification of the Jewish people and asserting that this collective must be eliminated. That is anti-Semitic. Number three, Jewish students are systematically being excluded from spaces that they want to inhabit, whether it be in student life, in student government, in club relations. Jewish students are sometimes made to disavow their Zionism, their connection to Israel before joining or becoming part of those organizations, being allowed to participate. And groups that formerly partnered regularly with Jewish organizations and clubs are often no longer willing to partner because those Jewish organizations are in some way tied with Israel. And number four, social media. Social media amplifies all of this, and it has a terrible effect on the mental health of students. And I'm thinking Colleen might be a good person to follow up with that. There are sites that you know about, like Twitter, and there are other sites that you don't even know about, probably like Yik Yak, which is totally anonymous and allows for anonymous, proximate harassment of Jewish students. And it's especially true for students who choose to get involved in student government and other political activity. So those are the four things that I want to leave you with. I'll leave you with a bit of good news, which was referenced by Eric and then again a little bit by Steve. By proactively supporting Jewish students, by bringing non-Jewish student leaders into our circle of Jewish friends and working closely with the UCSB administration, we've been able to mitigate the effects of some of these challenges. In fact, Santa Barbara Hillel has supported student leaders so effectively that UCSB is the only UC campus that has turned away BDS resolutions in student government every single time. And some years it's brought up to us multiple time after time after time. So thank you for your support and for being here to learn a little bit more this evening.
Okay, and now Abe, your turn for opening remarks.
Thank you, Steve. The question I'm asked most frequently in recent days is anti-Semitism worse in the US today? And if so, why? The answer as to whether it is worse or not is both yes and no. It's the quality, not necessarily the quantity. Steve, in his introduction, indicated to you, we're dealing with a disease without a vaccine, without an antidote. We're dealing with a vaccine that has served interests. It served communism, fascism. Mark Twain in 1890 went to Europe, came back and wrote an essay concerning the Jews. Wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. The smart, the stupid, the rich, the poor, the religious, the atheists. He came back with an answer, but he was troubled and devoted most of his life after that trip as a philo-Semite fighting anti-Semitism. So it's always been there, and it serves interests on the left and on the right, and as Steve says, metastasized. What about the US? How is the anti-Semitism of the past compared to what we are experiencing? I recommend to you, if you haven't seen it, Ken Burns' The Holocaust in the United States. If you're worried about anti-Semitism today, and if you watch this 6-hour documentary, you will understand how deep, how serious it is in this country. In the years of the ADL, when we took polls, we found that 30% of the American people believe in the classical stereotypes of anti-Semitism, that Jews are too powerful, they control, they're not loyal. And even after Nostra Aetate with the Catholic Church made this tremendous turnaround, today still about 30% of the American people believe we're guilty for killing Christ and it has its consequences. So why do we feel different today than we felt 50 years ago? And the reasons are several, and I'll try to enumerate them very quickly. One is we developed a containment strategy. We developed a firewall in the last 50 years to protect us from what we knew is there, it was latent, to make sure that the latency doesn't come forward. It was a strategy based on coalitions, using the media, using the truth, exposing litigation, legislation. All these elements together developed a firewall, which kept the anti-Semitism, which was serious, in the sewers with a cover on. So why now are we experiencing in this very public way? First, and interesting, the media never covered. I can tell you in the years we issued the reports on anti-Semitism, it never made news. So the good news or the bad news is the media today covers it because it's politicized, because it's out there, etc. So that impacts. By the way, there were swastikas in Emory University 50 years ago, but who knew? Who cared? Today there's a swastika in Emory, and it's global. Everybody knows. You figure out if it's good and bad. I think it's good, but some people feel it's not necessarily good. So, okay, so one is it's news. Two, the internet. If you ask me for one single element in our lifetime that has changed for the good and for the bad, a lot of good, a lot of communication, a lot of information, a lot of education. The unintended consequences is superhighway for anti-Semitism. We can talk about it in greater detail later. Then the political extremism. Anti-Semitism at the end of the day is the big lie. The answer to the big lie is truth. You like Trump or you don't like Trump, Trump destroyed truth. I don't care politically how you feel about him. The most serious element in our concern, and when we're talking about anti-Semitism, is he destroyed this weapon of fighting the big lie. He also destroyed media, the truth of media. We use media to educate, to expose, etc. That too is gone. And so in its totality, we have a new universe out there. And it is, again, the 200 neo-Nazis in Charlottesville were not created by Trump. But Trump gave them the sense that they can march. They were smart enough to know that if they march and say, we'll replace the Jews, maybe they'll lose their job. Maybe their kids will have difficulties at school. But all of a sudden, all taboos were gone. All taboos were gone. We need to rebuild that firewall. We need, and also another element which is gone, is coalitions. We are into tribalism. Everybody's first, foremost, first, last for themselves. We have to learn how to rebuild coalitions. So this is why it's worse. Actually, it's not worse, but we see it more, we hear about it more, and therefore we feel it more.
Excellent. So please be thinking about your questions. And those of you on Zoom, chat your questions, put your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as possible. None have come up to me yet, so I get to ask the first question. Abe, and I want to go back to you. You wrote an incredible book about, a very early book, by the way, about the danger of online hate, the anti-Semitic superhighway that you just referred to as one way of thinking about the role of the internet here. Last night, I was privileged to have dinner with you, and you told an amazing story about the Ku Klux Klan and the role of the ADL in unmasking the Klan and how that relates somehow to social media. Would you please share that with our audience?
Yeah, I remember at the advent of social media, when we started feeling the impact on us, we traveled several times to Palo Alto to meet with the geniuses. And we said to the geniuses, thank you. Thank you for what you've delivered. But no thank you for, as I said, the unintended consequences. Because what it did was it permitted bigots to go on in nanoseconds to transmit anti-Semitism and hate, etc. What Cedar's talking about is I'm trying to explain what the difference is, why this is so significant. I remember throughout the years of the ADL, people would ask me, tell me one thing that the ADL did that made the most significant difference in fighting hate and anti-Semitism. And the only thing that I would come up with, and it wasn't in my time, it wasn't in my day, it was before my day, was an approach and a strategy to defeat the Klan. The Klan was very serious, very serious. It wasn't only in the South. Most people thought it was in the South. It was in New York City. They filled Madison Square Garden. They marched in Chicago. They were everywhere. And the problem was, how do you deal with them? You know, we're talking about freedom of speech. We value freedom of speech. We came up with legislation that we drafted called the anti-mask statute. And basically it said that the First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees you the right to be a bigot. You want to be a bigot, Gesundheit. You can be a bigot, but take responsibility for your bigotry. Because what was happening was that these big chachamim, the starke, during the day were lawyers, you know, like grocery people, doctors, and at night they'd cover their identity and they would act out their hate. And what happened after the passing of this anti-hate legislation is it broke the back of the Klan. Didn't totally eliminate them, but all of a sudden these starker were no longer starker because they had to take responsibility as to who they are in acting out their hate of anti-Semitism. Fast forward 50 years. Comes the internet, puts the mask back on the bigots, provides them with the anonymity to act out their anti-Semitism and hate and message. So I know you want to deal, the answer to it, so let me go all the way. The answer to it is we need to develop a strategy to balance freedom of speech with civility. Balance freedom of speech, which we cherish, we value, and civility, which we used to cherish and value, to bring that back. And the example in our recent history is we can meet that challenge. After 9/11, America suffered the agony of how do you balance life and liberty with security? Here are all our freedoms, and how do you get security? Because all of a sudden we were threatened. And we came up not with a perfect answer. It was called the Patriot Act. We were ready to give up some of our freedoms in order to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Remember the days that you can get on a plane, chap lap, all right? Remember you can go to any public office building with Gornish, okay? We did it ourselves, nobody forced us. We came to a consensus that we have to give up some of our freedoms in order to have the greater freedom. And therefore the same thing has to happen on the internet and social media. Yes, freedom of speech, but yes, civility. The answers are difficult. Steve's struggling with it as a constitutional lawyer. Congress will have to deal with it. Congress, Heinz Morgan, as my mother would say, there's nobody to talk to. Hopefully soon, Congress will change and they'll begin to take the responsibility.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I've got some questions, and let's get them from the Zoom crowd too. The first question is for Rabbi Goodman, and then Tali, be thinking about your own experiences at USC, because I'll come to you next. People want to hear about what happened to you specifically, but I'll come to you next. Rabbi, a couple questions for you. You can answer whatever you want to answer. First one is, why hasn't any other UC campus been able to replicate your success? Don't you Hillel rabbis meet and share strategy? That's number one. Number two, a number of universities around the country, both public and private, have adopted pro-BDS, anti-Israel resolutions, both at the faculty and the student level. Let's focus on the public universities this person wants to know. As public universities, if indeed anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism, does that kind of activity violate our right to equal protection? Is there some case that maybe some lawyer, Eric Berg, might be thinking about bringing to deliver a consequence for that kind of conduct? So Rabbi, I'll turn it over to you, then Tali, over to you after Rabbi to talk about USC.
Great, thank you. So why has our success not been able to be replicated at other campuses? each campus is a unique environment. Each has its own ecosystem of students and faculty and administration and so on. And there are many campuses that are providing excellent support for students. So I don't want to leave you with this impression that we're doing something and we're keeping it a secret and not sharing it with others, and that the others are all doing bad things. There are many campuses that are doing good work. There are campuses where in a given year, a BDS resolution passes because so-and-so students were elected to student government, and that's just how the chips fell that year. It doesn't mean that every year at every other campus, there's a problem, and there are flare-ups in different ways at different campuses. What I think we should focus on is what resources can we provide at the various universities, Hillels, and other Jewish organizations around those campuses to provide support systems for the students. The students, in many cases, feel like they're on their own. They're just dangling in the wind. They don't know what to do. They're not constitutional lawyers. They're not free speech experts. They're students. Most of the students that are dealing with this they're going to school to go to school. Maybe they want to have a social life. Maybe they want to advance their career. They're not coming into their university experience to become a Zionist advocate or a Jewish advocate. They're just looking to explore, like you or I did when we were going to college. But they grow up very quickly, and it is a challenge. So I would look at what are the resources available at the different Hillels and at the different universities to support the Jewish students, and what connections do they make through to student government and to administration. Second, the question of does this violate equal protection laws? Again, I'm a rabbi and I'm the executive director. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I have been involved in the legal aspects of this to a reasonable degree. There's a balance here. There's a balance.
He was raised as a Catholic in Poland, Holocaust survivor as a baby.
I think our Zoom is no longer muted. There's a balance here, and the balance is between freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, which is a constitutional right and is also a very high value on university campuses. There's that balance along with the equal protection and anti-discrimination laws and issues related to today, in many cases, students push for creation of safe spaces where they and people like them are safe. Jews, unfortunately, are often not accorded the same protections and the same safe spaces that other minority groups are afforded. So ultimately, your intention between free speech issues and equal protection issues on a public university campus, it tends to lean toward the freedom of speech, and there's relatively little that is offered to enable students to shut down unpleasant discourse.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. And that's a great segue to Tali. Tali, another questioner wants, when you talk about what happened to you, to also talk about what was the impact on your friends, your social circle. I remember that you and I talked about that a little bit at the time as well. So can you share, and if it's uncomfortable for you, only talk about it to the extent that you are comfortable in this group.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. When there was an escalation in conflict in Israel, social media was pretty, at least my social media, was pretty inundated with a lot of posts using words like anti-Zionism and colonizers and apartheid and white supremacy and all of these like BDS Hamas buzzwords. And I had close friends that were using these words, not really even understanding what they meant. A lot of these people sort of, they're majoring in international relations, and all of a sudden they think they're the expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. they're not. Obviously, it's like very nuanced, but a lot of these people, they don't care because this conflict in the media is often equated to the racial conflict in America, which it is not the same at all, but that is the trendy way for, you know, organizations like BDS and to normalize anti-Semitism. And that is sort of, you know, what anti-Zionism is. It's a remanifestation of anti-Semitism in our modern day society, capitalizing on, you know, left-wing values to, you know, bring hate upon Jews. And as far as the first question you asked, you know, you know, we can probably, a lot of us agree that anti-Zionism is bad and anti-Semitism is bad. But the dangerous part about anti-Zionism is that it is so normalized, and it's sort of been manipulated into this like left-wing morality police anti-Semitism. And that's why I don't see it going away anytime soon, as even if, you know, there's legislation involved, because it is so normalized and it has been made part of this left-wing movement that you know, that is sort of used as a, like, you need to believe in this or else you are canceled, because that's what happened to me. I voiced my opinion about being a Zionist and being proud of being a Zionist and being proud of being a Jew, and I was shunned for it. I was sent paragraphs of text from multiple people saying how I'm such an Islamophobe and I am, like, all of these horrible words. I am justifying apartheid and a genocide. Like, I am responsible for it somehow, responsible for a genocide that is not actually happening. So yeah, I was shunned by a lot of people in my social circle. And a lot of my close friends at the time, you know, even the ones that didn't attack me, the others, many of them were silent. I seldom heard from any of my friends, "Hey, Tally, are you okay? I know, like, there's a lot of conflict going on right now and there's lots of these posts going around and you feel very passionate about it. So can you teach me something about this conflict or being a Jew?" I didn't hear any of that. All of the people who weren't attacking me were just standing idly by and letting it happen and not making an effort to educate themselves or ask questions or, you know, get to know people of different backgrounds. Like, I had been such, you know, I have tried to be such an ally to all my minority peers at the time. And then when it was, you know, their turn to try to be an ally towards me, nobody stepped up to the plate. And some of them even just turned their backs and walked away. So that was sort of my experience.
Yeah, and I remember, thank you for being so candid, and I remember talking to you at the time and how hurtful it was for you. And I mentioned to you that many students of mine at UCLA and UCSB had come to me. This was during the Gaza War in May of 2021, when so many students felt unsafe, physically unsafe on our university campuses. And even today, just a few months ago at UCLA, there was graffiti scrawled in chalk on the walls inside a classroom in, of all places, Bunch Hall, named after Ralph Bunche, the UN mediator who brokered the armistice agreements between Israel and Jordan and Israel and Egypt to end the War of Independence. In Bunche Hall, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist chalk scrawled on the walls, and it took the university well over a month to simply come and clean it off. And that made students feel very, very bad. I have a lot of great questions. So what I'm going to do now, Abe and Rabbi, is I'm going to ask about 5 questions. You can't answer all of them, but I want people to hear what others are asking because all the questions are superb. And just answer what you want. We'll go to Abe first and then to Rabbi. One person asking about code words. Soros is a code word. Apartheid is a code word. Genocide is a code word. Can you talk about that? What about the division within the American Jewish community? We have J Street, we have AIPAC, we have pro-Trump Jews, we have Jews who hate Trump. What about the division amongst our own community? How do we deal with that? And then the next question, and I think that Abe, you will talk about this a little bit, is why do we always seem to be playing defense? Can we play offense? This was what I asked you at lunch all those years ago, and you told me to take a deep breath and calm down. We are playing offense, but not, not with, we don't just go to DEFCON 3 every single time and fire the missiles. So can you talk about that? And, Zionism on campus, maybe Rabbi can address this. Zionism is a great story. It was the first national liberation movement of the 20th century. It inspired similar liberation movements in Africa and around the world. Why are we the bad guys now, all these years later? Can we talk about that? And I was going to ask this at the end, but if we don't have time, I'm going to put this question right now. Goes back to my comment about Bobrashov Street in Tel Aviv and those French shopkeepers. Should we here in Santa Barbara be thinking about real estate in Tel Aviv before it's too late? Or is that, a very panicky overreaction to what we've just acknowledged is a disease that's always there, but is being amplified on social media? We should all just take a deep breath and calm down. That was a question that our rabbi asked us to ponder when he wrote about these upcoming yesterday's program and tonight's program. So I'll stop there. Let me turn it over to Abe first and then Rabbi.
Okay, let's begin with code words. Soros is a good example. I was recently in a spa, and there was a gentleman, disagreed politically, but we're friends. Friends to the extent that I will tell you that 10 years ago, the ADL honored him because he was a mensch. Okay, but now things have changed in the last 10 years. And I sat around the table and we talked about politics, and I hear Soros, 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 Soros. And the Jews around the table, I saw their eyes go down. They didn't want to look at him, they didn't want to say anything. So I was in a spa, I went to the Schwitz, and I sat close to him in the Schwitz. And I said, Bill, we don't always agree, but I like you and I respect you. Please take the word Soros out of your vocabulary. And he says, why? Why? Alex Soros, he picked the vice president. I said, Bill, it's a code word for Jew. It's a code word for Jew. It's one word that says the Jews control media, they control politics, they control everything. And Bill, I will send you a paper which will show you that every anti-Semitic organization in the US and globally uses one word, Soros. And everybody in that world knows what it's about. He got a little teary, embraced me, and said, it may take me a little bit of time. I said, fine, fine. And that's, by the way, part of the answer of what we do, And that is, not in every situation, not everybody is real terrible, but it's a way to educate. It's a way to sensitize. Apartheid has a meaning, a very clear meaning, a meaning for all good people. What is apartheid? I apologize for those South Africans in the audience. It's South Africa. And everybody knows, it's very clear what it is. You don't have to explain it. It's bad, it's ugly, it's hateful, it's discriminatory. So, Israel, apartheid. I remember many of you, Zionism is racism. Remember racism was a bad thing? Zionism is racism. 70 countries voted for it. 20 years it took to remove it. Now it's metastasized, in another word. Apartheid it clicks to everybody, but it isn't. Israel's not an apartheid country. It's not. Black, white, yellow, it's not. Number two, the attack today is a lot different than the boycott. We're talking boycott BDS. It's not just a boycott of Israel. It's an effort to undo Israel, to make sure that Israel doesn't exist. What was the boycott of South Africa? It was to change its policy. It wasn't to destroy a country. It wasn't to undo a nation. It was to change its behavior, and it worked. BDS is not changing behavior. BDS is to destroy the Jewish state and the Jewish nationality. Steve, Jewish American divisions, we're a democracy. God bless us. We have, two Jews, they say 3 opinions. Now, to all the people who say, oh, what's the matter? I can't criticize Israel. That's not anti. You want to criticize Israel? Gesundheit. There's more criticism of Israeli policies in Israel per square Jew, per square kilometer. So it's not a question that you can't question Bibi or you can't question Lapid. Be my guest, Gesundheit. The issue is, who else do you criticize? You said standards, you said values. Where else do you apply these standards and values? You know what? I've even said, if you don't like Zionism, I can live with that, but you better not like French nationalism, Palestinian nationalism. There are unique people in the world who love the world of universalists. Gesundheit. So if you don't like nationalism, because you know what nationalism is, it is particular. You decide on your immigration laws, on your flag, on your song. Hello, that's what national liberation movements are. That's what nationalism is all about. So if you don't like Zionism, good for you, but you better not like anybody else's. But if everybody else is okay and Jewish nationalism is racism, you're an anti-Semite. You want me to go into
Just do one more, then we'll switch over to Rabbi.
Look, I think Jewish organizations and Jewish community and our differences is for another time and another subject. It does impact on anti-Semitism. It does deal with how we respond and how we react. The lessons in history are not great. Historically, the Jewish people, didn't come together. But in recent days, I think when the Jewish community sees danger in Israel from the outside, left or right, most of the time we stand together and we act. Can we come back to defense, and can we come back to Aliyah, because they're tied? So I save that to the end.
Okay, good. So Rabbi, you can continue. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne.
Wow. All right. Zionism, an inspiring national liberation movement. How many of you would agree with that statement? Raise your hand. How many of you remember the formation of Israel in 1948? How many remember 1967 and 1973? Okay, now for those on Zoom, now everyone here has raised their hand. How many of you came of age and your only understanding of Israel is Lebanon War, Second Lebanon War, Israel as occupier of Palestinians during the Intifada? We're living in a different world. And in that world, the college students of today don't generally see Israel as a liberating force, as an inspiring national liberation movement. They see Israel as an occupation. And that's the challenge. We can talk about how to undo some of that, but some of that is generational reality. And some of that is tied, and Abe has recently written about what's going on in Israel, and many of us follow very closely. I go to Israel 2 or 3 times a year, very, very connected to what goes on there. And we can't just paper over some of those differences and some of the realities. Second, the code words. Apartheid or Zionist, it's interesting. There are a handful of student leaders, non-Jewish at UCSB, who I've become very close with, have taken on travel trips to Israel, taken them there with a group of some Jewish students. And in what we've done, one of the discussions that came out this summer, one of them said, I had never before this trip heard Zionist used in a positive way. It's always been used as an insult. And everyone else around the table pretty much nodded and they understood. And I think that was a little bit along the lines of what Tali was talking about, that people use Zionist in a derogatory fashion. And we need to reframe that word and to recapture the positive use of that for what it actually is. Division in the Jewish community. There is always going to be some division, and we want a diversity of viewpoints. The challenge that we see on the college campus is what's referred to as, I would refer to, and students often discuss it as tokenization, taking a Jewish person as a token representative of the community and using them as a representative or as emblematic of the rest of the Jewish community. So you pluck out an anti-Zionist Jew who gets up there and speaks about BDS and says, well, I'm Jewish and I'm offended by what my people are doing, and therefore Israel is immoral, and therefore we need one state, or we need no Israel, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say there's no other minority group that allows the dissenting tiniest of tiny minority of that group to stand forward and represent them. You can say that Justice Clarence Thomas has risen to the heights of the judiciary in our country, but most reasonable thinking people would not say that he represents the African-American community as a mainstream voice in that community. So to pull Jewish voices out in that distinct minority and to say those are the Jews we like, that's anti-Semitic. And finally, can we play offense? The one program that we put together that I'll share with you, some of you are pretty familiar with this already. We began a program about 7 years ago now as a pilot program to change the discourse on campus. And what we did is decided to bring non-Jewish student leaders, campus influencers, the people with the most political involvement and clout on campus and strong social networks, to Israel and the Palestinian territories, so that they could travel with us and see an authentic view, warts and all view of Israel and Palestinian society with their own eyes, and build connections with each other. And by the end of that trip, which we've done every summer except those 2 COVID years, we've done every summer, we've taken about 25 students, mostly non-Jewish students, about 20 non-Jewish student leaders each year. We're showing them authentic Israel, but we're showing it to them so that they can come back, and when they read the BS that is thrown at them online, they know they can speak from their own experience about what they saw there. And then they have connections with each other and connections with the Jewish community. So those who might have formerly boycotted Jewish organizations because they had no knowledge of what we were doing and they were just intrinsically anti-Zionist, those people are now some of our strongest allies on campus.
Okay, so I'm going to shift to, again, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. I haven't seen any from the Zoom crowd yet, but if we have them, I want to please get to the Zoom questions too. I want to ask a couple of questions about the subject of education, which you touched on, all three of you really. A couple of you out there have asked about what websites or resources would you recommend for our community to be better educated, which is all of us here, number one. Number two, if you could comment, any of you, on the controversial subject of critical race theory and the ethnic studies curriculum that is now mandatory in high schools in the state of California and in other states around the country. Is there any danger there of anti-Semitism creeping into the curriculum, either through some of these code words like apartheid, Zionism, and so forth? And then finally, I'm going to hijack what I thought was one of the best questions from yesterday that was intended really to be asked of people my age, but I'm going to turn that question to Tali, and I'd like you to answer this now while our other two are thinking about the other education questions and any other comments about education that you would like to make. The question yesterday, Tali, was asked, how should we talk, we, my age, to our children and our grandchildren about these issues? And I'm old enough to be your grandfather. I'm old enough to be your father. And given your position as a recent university graduate, what would you like your cohort, your age group, to hear from us as parents or grandparents when we talk to you about this very important subject? So I'll start with you, if you could comment on that, and then we'll go to Abe and then to Rabbi Goodman.
Yeah, so I think I sort of went through a period probably as a teenager where I myself had a little bit of like internalized self-hatred as like a Jew. And I think a lot of people are affected by that, where they feel a tiny bit of shame around being Jewish, and they're embarrassed to tell people that they're Jewish or things like that. I know I like went through a period like that. And although I never completely, you know, pushed aside my Jewish identity, I definitely, you know, buried it a little bit within myself. And I didn't know like so many things that were so key to my Jewish identity. I didn't exactly realize the connection that I had to Israel, and how important my Jewish heritage was to who I am as a person. And I think, you know, my mother is she did a great job of like instilling those amazing Jewish values in me and raising me like with a lot of those traditions that our ancestors literally died for. And she did a great job like passing those on to the next generation. And that's something, you know, that's a mitzvah that we can do, is pass on traditions to the next generation. I recently saw a statistic that said that kids nowadays who aren't raised, you know, observing Shabbos in some way, their grandkids are like, you know, there's only like a 5% chance that they'll like raise a Jewish family or something. Like there's a tiny chance that their grandchild will be a practicing Jew. So I think it's really, really important to, you know, practice that mitzvah of passing on traditions to the next generation and amplifying the Jewish culture and celebrating it. That is so important, to instill pride for being Jewish. Like that is something that I struggled with, and I have, you know, come a long way in being so proud of my Judaism. But you know, I think it's so important to, you know, pass on those traditions in a prideful way and educate our children that, you know, being Jewish is a really wonderful thing, and our ancestors fought so hard for this. Why did they fight so hard to be Jewish? Because being Jewish is awesome. So,
Good
yeah.
for you. That was, I'm really glad I asked you to answer that question. I'm very glad. Okay, Abe, if you could continue on the education theme.
Yeah,
And,
all right. So I want to continue on Tally.
okay, you do what you want.
Okay. Tell my wife. One of the haunting statistics of recent years polling of Jews on anti-Semitism, which was actually an American Jewish Committee poll in recent years, is how many Jews are hiding their Jewishness. And that's a victory for the anti-Semites, which we are giving them. When you talk about, you know, Hitler, Nazi, etc., it's almost a posthumous victory if the anti-Semitism can intimidate Jews from being Jews. It is very serious in Europe. It is, if you think it's serious here, it's very, very serious in Europe because the threat is greater in Europe. So there, a decision to send your child to a day school is not, it's, philosophical. Yes, I separate them, not separate them. Shabbos, not Shabbos, kashrus, all these issues. No, there's a question of security. Jewish children and parents in Amsterdam and in London go to day schools with police escorts. And so first, it's, you want your child to understand that being Jewish, you have to be surrounded by, you go to shul, you can't find a shul. You know how to find a shul in Europe? You look for barriers. I went once, I was looking for Purim for the shul, I couldn't find it. 3 police cars, I found it, because it wasn't a police station. So the haunting thing is, we know about campus. People are changing names again. Kids are not wearing Magen Davids. In my time, in your time, you went on a college campus, what did kids wear as t-shirts? Their grandparents went to Israel, stew Coca-Cola, drink Coca-Cola, ITF. You're not going to find it today on a college campus. Now, I'm not sure that's the big mitzvah, but pride of Yiddishkeit, of Jewishness, that's an antidote, if you will, okay, for us. Because first, we need to be stark with what we are. And sadly, we shouldn't be Jewish because they're anti-Semitism. We should be Jewish, as Tali says, because it's awesome. But that's an answer. That's an answer, right? Education. That's the only antidote we have. Since it's the only thing we have, we need to use it. Sadly, you can be infected by anti-Semitism in a nanosecond. From your friend, from your parent, from your church, from an imam, quickly. To undo it, unlearn it, is a long process. But we have no other options. So we must do it. We must utilize all our elements, all our seichel, all our techniques, and because that's all we've got. You educate by exposing non-Jewish kids to Jews, to Judaism, to Israel. All these things work. I think there needs to be a birthright for non-Jews, okay? Yeah. In the ADL, we used to take police officers, we used to take teachers, professors, college presidents. It works. 95% it works. That's a pretty good return. So it's education in the broadest sense. The broadest sense. First about who we are, what we believe, and then in terms of Israel, because there's so much ignorance. Bye-bye. I'm still reserved.
Which means you have 30 seconds.
Okay. Yes, as you were leading in, this idea that we build our allies, we build our friends, we educate people through immersing ourselves and them with one another, which is a challenge today because of this. There's a notion on campus that is often put out there called anti-normalization. If you want to make sure that you do not dignify the other person's position, you don't relate to them, you shun them, you cancel them, anti-normalization. So therefore, if you do something with Hillel or other Jewish organizations, you're normalizing Israel as something that's legitimate, and therefore you're not going to do that. So what's the antidote to that? It's the education. It's the taking people on these trips. And as I mentioned, we started these in 2015, which is essentially, it's like Birthright for a broader audience. And we began with, there were 5 campuses that started the first summer. 5 of us did this as a pilot program. And then the next year it was 10, and then 20, and then 40, and now there's 100 campuses that are doing these kinds of trips, which is amazing. And it's an expensive endeavor, but it's the only way we can break through and make this happen. Education. there are in the college campus setting, which is where I have been for these last 14 years, we utilize partnerships with the university. We try to understand who are our resources outside of the university ecosystem, particularly ADL. Dan Meisel was mentioned earlier, so I just wrote an email today. So a grad student who's involved in one of the departments at UCSB got the notice from Federation that this was going out tonight, and checked in with me about what are the resources that she can bring this to her department, because her department chair wants to do something. And so I put her in touch with ADL. We need to know who are the players out there and who gives good, supportive, and accurate information. So ADL is one. Hillel International has, within the last 18 months or so, devoted significant resources to a national anti-Semitism program, because we need to do this. This wasn't 14 years ago. I didn't think this was how I would be spending a lot of my time, but it is how I'm spending a lot of my time. And this is not just on our campus. I'm no expert in critical race theory, but the way we've seen something analogous or similar play out on the college campus is called intersectionality. And intersectionality is a worldview that says the world is comprised of interlocking systems of oppression, and you need to find who else is equally oppressed or similarly oppressed and join forces with them to overcome the oppressions that are there in the world. And when we join together with different organizations on campus, so in the progressive world, in the left-leaning world of the college campus, the Jews, when we join together with other groups that subscribe to this theory of intersectionality, we're never the most oppressed. We don't win the oppression Olympics. We lose because we're white. Even if many of our students are Persian and Jews of color and so on, we're white and privileged. And therefore, we don't win and we're shunned. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. I don't know if that directly relates to CRT, but that's as close as I can get.
Okay. Thank you. And again, thank you for all the terrific questions. I think we have time for one more round. Maybe if we get more time, we'll see. So again, I'm going to ask a few questions to our panelists, and maybe we'll have time for some closing remarks. Abe is reserved on a couple of points as well. One question that comes up a lot is what can we do about all this? Each of us individually and as the Santa Barbara Jewish community, what can we do? So I'd like each of you to think about what you might say in response to that very important question. Another question, and we've already touched on this, let's peel back the Band-Aid and expose the scab a little bit more. There are, and Tali mentioned this, there are Jews in this country who are very, 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 very opposed to the policies of the state of Israel. Even when we had the most recent government led by Yair Lapid, a government that included Minister of Regional Affairs, an Arab, a government that included a huge ideological span of political parties, almost like the US government with Mitch McConnell and Ilhan Omar serving together. That was the last Israeli government. And yet, nevertheless, there were still many American Jews who said, oh, Israel, no. They're racist, they're apartheid, they're not progressive, I'm progressive, etc. And the point I want to make about that is there a safe haven against anti-Semitism for Jews who do everything they possibly can in this country to distance themselves from Israel? Is there a safe haven for them? Is that a vaccine against anti-Semitism? And then finally, let's end on an upbeat note. So if you could save this for last, if each of you could just give us one piece of good news from your perspective. Okay, we're going to begin with Tali, then we'll go to Rabbi, and then we'll end with Abe. Any of those issues that you want or not, you are free to pass as well.
Can you repeat the first question again?
The first question I have forgotten. So,
Oh,
but
yeah.
what can we do
What
as a
can we do?
community or
Okay.
individually? Because I just got
Um,
two more, sorry.
I'll leave the what can you do to these two, but I could maybe tell you about a little bit what I'm trying to do for myself. You know, for a lot of Jews, it's scary to, you know, be outwardly Jewish, like wearing Judaica, wearing, you know, being a outwardly presenting Jew. It makes us vulnerable. But being, you know, having pride in our Judaism is, I think, for me, the only way to, you know, overcome this anti-Semitism is to educate myself as much as I possibly can, and to, you know, be proud of being Jewish. Those are like really the two best things that, you know, I think I could do, you know, other than maybe a self-defense class or something. But yeah, I think as far as, you know, what can you do? You know, like you said, it's a virus. It's not going away. Anti-Semitism is not going away. So the only thing you can do is what all the Jews before us did is, you know, keep holding on to that, to those traditions and to the pride and your Jewishness.
Great. Tali was a late addition to this panel, and you were just absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left, so I'll give 8 minutes each. 5 minutes each, first to Rabbi and then to Abe to close up.
I'm going to echo what Tali was just finishing on. Don't despair. What can we do? We shouldn't despair. We, as an organized Jewish community, are often fixated on this topic. But we need to remember that the next generation is not going to want to be Jewish out of a feeling of guilt about anti-Semitism. They're not going to be actively Jewish because of that. They're going to be actively Jewish because there's something that we have to offer. There's something that we have in terms of values, in terms of traditions, in terms of peoplehood, in terms of connections, whatever it is. So we need to not despair, and we need to have pride in who we are. And I think that we should make sure that we're focusing more on real relationships and less on spending screen time and those kind of relationships. That we need people-to-people connection, and that's, we really haven't touched on this, but the last 2 to 3 years have been horrific on everyone's mental health, but I think especially for those in the university space, especially during that year plus when people were not connecting people to people, and there was some of the most vicious stuff going on online between students. And it wasn't just anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism was one manifestation of that. And we need to have more in-person time. So I'm so thankful that we're able to be here in person, and that with students, we're mostly able to be in person as well. American Jews who are against Israel, I think this is a challenge. And I think that the current direction that the Israeli government is heading, we're in for some challenges. This is not easy. You have about 6.5 million Jews in Israel and about 6.5 million Jews in the US. These are the two poles of the world Jewish community. Everyone else is small potatoes compared to that. And we're growing apart. We're growing apart, and I don't have the answer. I discussed the importance of travel opportunities to Israel and building people-to-people connections, but it's not a simple answer. And American Jews do have the right to dissent. I personally believe that those in Israel have much more right to dissent than when we air dirty laundry here. You know, I have 2 sons who are in their 20s. Neither one served in the IDF. That means that I don't have certain rights to to set Israeli policy, let's say, as if I were living in Israel and my sons were serving and I were serving. And if I cast my lot completely with Israel, then I believe personally I'm in a different position. That doesn't mean that I have no right to say anything about what happens in Israel. One piece of good news, I think, for all of the challenges that we discussed here, most Jewish students on college campuses are having a positive experience. They are not immersing themselves in Israel politics. They are not immersing themselves, their day-to-day experience is not one of anti-Semitism. Their day-to-day experience is that of a positive university experience. So it is the minority of occurrences. And as Abe was saying, they rapid what used to my former colleague and longtime director at UCLA Hill, Chaim Seidler-Feller, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, would say, what do we do back then? What did we do when we find a swastika on campus? We paint over it and we move along. So like you said, it didn't bubble up so much. Today, a swastika comes up, someone takes a picture of it, it's immediately, relayed to me and to other people, and it becomes practically an international incident. Not every one of those needs to become an international incident. And so I think for most of the students, most of their experience is a positive one. And if they know where they can go to get support, the professors, the administration, the Hillel professionals, whomever it is on their campus, to turn to when there is a challenge, then they can be in good hands and they can have a really positive experience.
Thank you, Rabbi. And Abe, 5 minutes or however long you would like to talk.
Jews who aren't happy with Israel. I don't think we should spend time in that. I've dealt with self-hating Jews. I don't know what a self-hating Jew is. I've never found one. I don't know how to define one. It's very sad. Sad because, as the rabbi just said, we don't have the consequences of our opinions. The Israelis, if they're wrong on their policies, God forbid, will pay the consequences, which may make the difference between life and death. We have the luxury to pontificate. And so if J Street is wrong, they'll at a cocktail party say 6 months from now, you know what, we were wrong. And so to me, it's to say to them, fine, it's a free society, it's a free community, gesundheit. But you don't bear the consequences of your opinions. If you criticize in America, you bear the consequences. You vote, you get Trump or you get Biden, okay. But there, you're pontificating. Who gave you that? Because if God forbid the policies that you advocate will hurt Israel, the consequences are very serious. Okay. One word we did not mention in this whole evening, which is, I think, a very important word today in our agenda, and that's called security. So I would say, what do we do for the short term, hopefully not, but a long term? Security, security, security. Yes, depend on law enforcement, and we need to worry about security. It's something that was never on our agenda. We look to Europe, the Europeans, they have, it's here too. And we need to take it seriously. And as a community, we need to take it seriously. We need to fund it. Yes, the government will fund. It is very, very important till this episode of this Magefa. This is a disease. It's like COVID. It erupts, and hopefully it will simmer down. I'm an optimist. Golda Meir once said, Jews don't have the luxury to be pessimists. I survived the Shoah when 1.5 million Jewish children perished. How do I have the chutzpah not to be optimistic about Jewish life and Jewish future? And to me, when you ask the question, so what do we do? I survived as a child, as an infant. So in the years of growing up, I tried to figure out what it is I survived. And I figured out and I learned one simple haunting fact, that wherever and whenever and however good people stood up, Jews lived, gays lived, ministers lived. I'm here tonight because one lady who maybe did not have the intellect to weigh and measure the risks, because if she did, I wouldn't be here. She responded as a human being to another human being. It's how do we get the bystanders to be upstanders? That's our challenge, because in the world, there are billions of good people and a few million of hateful, bad people. The problem, the challenge to us is to find the trigger mechanism to get the good people who are just sitting there. Listen, Jews perished because people didn't stand up. And where they stood up, whether it was Schindler, whether it was Wallenberg, whether it was Bulgaria, not the countries that gave us music and philosophy and art. Bulgaria, we laugh at the Balkans. Albania, they saved their Jews because there was a basic decency in that society. So I think we have to struggle. How do we get the good people to stand up and say no? That's the greatest defense. When you look at bullying, it takes one kid to say no. It sounds easy, it's not easy. So it's not easy, but we know the answer. We know if there's anti-Semitism, we get the president, as he spoke last week, we get the Congress. That's part of it, to make sure that the biggest understand, because what happened is they broke the taboos and all of a sudden it's okay. We got to put that genie back into the bottle. They need to understand that it's not okay, but not only with words, not only to get all the leaders on all communities. It's much tougher today, but still, politicians you can get. It's important. Don't knock it, because it sends a message that anti-Semitism is un-American, immoral, unchristian, and it has its impact. But that's not enough. That's not enough. We also need to figure out consequences. There needs to be consequences to this behavior. Again, there are no consequences today in our society for lying, okay? There are no consequences for terrible behavior. We are suffering from it, but we need to develop consequences. If you're an anti-Semite, you need to pay a price. Or, I have another way. You want to be rehabilitated? Gesundheit. I will work with you to rehabilitate you, but you got to prove to me that you want to be rehabilitated, and then I'll embrace you, and then you can be a mensch. But if you are an anti-Semite and you don't want to be rehabilitated, you're going to pay a price. And that's where we need all the other good people to stand up and say, yep. Listen, Mel Gibson, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, Mel Gibson was the number one in America. He was People's Choice, Best Director, Best Actor, most money, the biggest hawkum in the world. And then he did his shtick, his anti-Semitic film. And you know what? All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it took a little time. He's no longer number one. He's no longer this. He's no longer that. He's no longer this. Okay? We have in the past on Zionism, racism in the UN, we taught Mexico a lesson. We taught the Swiss a lesson. So we have the means. We need to be able to strategize to pick the target, but we need to develop the message out there that there's consequences to being an anti-Semite. You just can't get away with it. But it's much more difficult today because the taboos have been broken. And once the taboos have been broken, we're number one. Now, I'll deal with the question of Aliyah. Okay, I don't think we're at that stage. Okay, I don't think we're at that stage. I think we're at a stage where we need to make sure that Israel is there, strong. if God forbid, we, at this point, the French need them, the Europeans and Jews need them, and they're going. So the other thing, and that's another subject, you could read about it in the last weekend, which I spoke out. I'm getting fresque and from all sides, but okay. We have to make sure that Israel continues to be a democracy. Farvos. Because if they change who's a Jew, guess what? That insurance policy has been tainted. And so, yeah, I think Aliyah is our insurance. If, you know, I don't have to say to you, if there was an Israel in 1938, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, we wouldn't be commemorating the Shoah. So yes, we have it now. It's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. It's not a faith, you know, faith and hope and all these things. But there are existentialist threats to the Jewish state. It's called Iran. Okay? It's a very serious existentialist threat. So nothing is a given. Nothing is a given. But Havdil, it's not exactly the same thing, but I see an existentialist threat to the unity of the Jewish people if Israel goes in the direction of theocracy and extremism. Okay? And I see it. You know, I'm one of those who believes what people say. You know, if we believe, a lot of people didn't believe what Hitler said. Maybe if they believed it, they would have acted. I believe what people say. And when politicians in Israel say they're going to change this or they're going to change the law, I believe it. And when the government information embraces it, I said, don't you dare. And so, again, I'm talking too much about myself. There was an editorial in the Jerusalem Post on Sunday after my interview where I said, I support Israel unconditionally. I've all my life supported Israel unconditionally. But now I've added a condition, as long as she remains a democracy. Okay, I'm getting clever. And the editorial said, the price, quoted what I said, and said, Mr. Prime Minister, we're writing this, and there's a Jerusalem Post. It's not a lefty Haaretz. It's a right-wing publication, more or less. Mr. Prime Minister, so you shouldn't say to us 6 months from now, I didn't know that these would be the consequences. So we're telling you, listen to the American Jews who are saying to you, we love you unconditionally, but be a democracy. Because the democracy, if you're talking about Aliyah, if they start looking around, you know, changing second grandfather, third grandfather, reform, conservative, ochembe. So yeah, I think Aliyah is the ultimate. Halavai, we don't have to get there. And it's not Portugal, I hear New Zealand. You know, Jews are now talking about passports. You know what? The passport is, I am a Jew, and I'm here in the state of Israel. That's our passport. That's our guarantee. That's our optimism. And God willing, you know what the joke is? They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank all of you for being here tonight. Thank all of you on Zoom for joining us. And thank you to our very, very wonderful panel. Thank you.